Often the answer to feeling bad is just helping other people and supporting other people. That is kind of a natural part of being in a church, for example. But if you don't have that, and like that definitely gives me a better feeling than anything selfish, you know, like if I do something for somebody else, it gives me a much better feeling than doing something for myself.
Välkommen till Evolution Podcast. På äventyret att skapa en total evolution av individer och kultur. Där du och jag, som medvetna och trygga män, står i service till en värld där gemenskap, nyfikenhet, skaparkraft och visdom frodas. Genom modiga möten med våra gäster bjuder vi in dig att engagera dig till att bygga en kultur av ansvarstagande, trygghet och medvetenhet. Om inte nu, när? Om inte du, vem?
Welcome to Evolution Podcast. My name is Sebastian and I'm here with Mattias Fyrörn and Ben Ditto. We're gonna talk with Ben Ditto today, who is a London-based creative director, an artist who loves to, it's an internet fan. Fantastic to follow on Instagram, so I can recommend following him there. So, Mattias.
The sense I get from you, Ben, is also like there is this pushing or like confronting or challenging status quo, and in some way questioning or awakening, you know, what is okay, what is not okay. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think that I've been interested in this since I was very young, 5, 6, 7 years old. I've always been interested in comedy and satire and horror and anything that kind of is challenging. Now on the internet, we would call it being an edgelord. You know, it's a very long history going back hundreds of years of pushing the boundaries of culture. But I think that it's always like, I don't really like stuff that's just confrontational or shocking for no reason. I like things that are beautiful and shocking or funny or interesting or spark curiosity, but very rarely stuff that's just shocking for no reason. For example, you know, I'm very interested in images of violence, and I have been for my whole life. But it's not just because I think violence is funny or whatever. It's because of the effect that it has on your brain. You know, the same with like erotica. I don't really like pornography, but I think that, you know, violence, erotica, humor, all of these things have an interesting effect on our brain. And I've always been interested in that for sure.
So when it comes to like, we have an immense power today to be kind of the sender of information or like capture people's attention. And then in that capturing also create, as you say, like something happens in the brain. But what happens in the brain is also shifting awareness, is also shifting identity, it's also shifting the who we self-believe we are, is also shifting who we think we are in relationship to culture, to other individuals. So could you speak to like what inside you do you long to kind of express, to be seen and heard and understood in viewers that consume either your art or what you share?
Yeah, this is a very good point that you're making. And I was actually thinking about this yesterday on an unrelated topic. When I was younger, media, especially broadcast media, was very homogenous. So you would have a few newspapers and a few television channels. The average person did not really have the power to communicate what they felt. But since I was very young, I was interested in magazines and films and TV shows. I lived in a small town, very small town. Fashion magazines, music magazines were like a window to the world, but I also saw that they had lots of power. Now, you know, we can all be broadcasters. You know, I mean, we're on a podcast now. Obviously, there are billions of podcasts. There are billions of social media chats. Some of these are extremely powerful. Like, you know, Joe Rogan, whoever, is probably more powerful than most national newspapers. And this is completely new. It's a very democratic, meritocratic way of communicating, but also at the same time, maybe 30 years ago, we were all consuming the same culture. So I was actually thinking about, do you remember Far Side, Gary Larson Far Side cartoons? It was like, he drew these single panel cartoons in American newspapers. and they were very, very popular in the 1980s, 1990s. I think it was that time. And everybody in the world knew these cartoons, but it was just one panel. Now we don't really have a phenomenon like this. You know, we don't really have phenomena where everybody is looking at one piece of paper and having the same experience. And the reason that we're being divided so much is because of marketing, capitalism, or tech companies wanting to kind of segment us into marketing sections. But the benefit for people like me, and probably people like you, we then have this meritocratic power to communicate what we want to our audience. And for me, that's just like, it's just something I've always been interested in. I have always been interested in publishing, communicating, putting messages out there, making media, whatever it is. And I would say I'm not an artist. Really, I'm not like a gallery artist, because I'm not like doing stuff to be in a gallery. It's more that I have like a drive to share things with people,
So what, so if you could kind of, with your expression, what is like a shift or like an awareness or like a sense or a feeling that if that was transmuted, or more, maybe less transmuted, but more received into the individual, what feels like you made an important impact?
That's a great question. I think it's the feeling that I used to have when I would read a very cool magazine. It's this kind of tension of being entertained and informed, something curious, shocking, funny, all of those kind of limbic sort of effects on the brain, a bit of horror, sex, a bit of humor, a bit of all of these things. I had this experience, for example, I know that it became very bad, but early Vice magazine was perfect for this. It had this kind of, it was like lots of in jokes, like you felt like it was a little group of friends doing something that only they understood, and you were on the outside trying to get in, but you kind of understood it. Before this, there was a magazine in the UK called Private Eye, which is very different. It's like a politics magazine. It's kind of very serious, and it's been going for a long time, but it has humor as well. They've been doing the same jokes, tiny little jokes in the things for like 50 years, 60 years. And when you start to read it, you don't understand these little things. And then over 10, 20, 30 years, you feel part of you're like part of it. So I just love all of this stuff. I think I do feel, I don't know about you, but I do feel that there is a responsibility on me to be entertaining. I don't deserve an audience for no reason. I have to be giving them something. But the thing that I'm giving them can be changing from information to, humor, to horror, to, surprise, whatever it is. But I do have to be entertaining them in some way.
And I think that like there is an immense power, as you say, that this meritocratic culture and publishing world that we live now is like, it's amazing. And also on the other side of that the only thing that like attention is anyone can get attention, and that is a very high value resource. Like we have this kind of influencer culture now, and it's very dangerous in the sense that anyone that thinks something that resonates with others, even if it's wrong, even if it's stupid, can get a lot of attention. Where this other guest, he's more into kind of science dude, but he said like if one person says something that's wrong and it gets a lot of likes and a lot of shares, it becomes the truth. And of course, that's also the issue with old media. Like if it's published in a big newspaper, if it's published in a big news channel, then everyone believes it's true. So it's the same issue. Now we have a more kind of diverse culture expressing many different opinions, but we don't know, like, of course, there's maybe something closer to absolute truth, but it's also the challenge of communicating kind of personal experience or insight or entertainment, and I can lack the responsibility of someone with influence. If it's small or if it's big, what is the impact I'm actually having? And am I stimulating or the thinking or the being of the consumer, or am I kind of projecting truth that they are to fit in a box, if this makes sense?
It makes total sense. I think it's very interesting to compare the truth. And I guess if we were going back, say, 100 years to look at conflict, for example, there's lots of conflict in the world. I would have to believe what my newspaper told me. If the Times of London said that this is what's happening with Germany, I have no alternative. As a normal person, I have no alternative but to believe what the Times of London is saying. The only people in the UK, for example, who would have a different opinion were people who were traveling a lot, who had, say, rich people in high society would have relationships with senior officials in the German, and they would have different opinions. But this is very rare. We can all do our own research. But, and I don't want to be political. I don't know what you guys think, but Russian or Ukrainian or pro-Russia, pro-Ukraine, or Gazan pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, you can be on either sides of those things and think that the other side is completely crazy and that your reality is the reality. And I think there's this kind of the concept of a universal truth is relatively new. The ancient Greeks and Romans and whoever else, all of these mythologies before that, they were just illustrative. So it didn't really matter if something was true. So and so died by being drowned in rose petals or whatever. I can't remember his name. Like, it probably didn't happen, but it doesn't matter because the story is what matters. Now I think that everybody on every side is going for the exact truth, and actually, it's just too complex for the average person. The average person does not. I mean, I will definitely support one side of a conflict because I think that they are in the right, but I can also definitely see where they are doing things which are not good, or which are, they lie. Everybody lies. Everybody's lying all the time. This is the thing. Nobody's being honest. I think it's confusing for the average person now because maybe it was easier when the Times of London just said, this is the truth. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to do my job and this is the truth. Now we're all like, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've been under psychic attack for the last 2 or 3 years. I do not trust that Western powers are good anymore. I do not think that China and Russia are pure evil and the West is pure good. I don't think that those guys are good either. But I think that lots of us have had these kind of safe blankets taken away by the last few years. I'm sort of going off and my responsibility as a person on the internet is to probably, like you say, not say stupid bullshit and not say things are facts when I can't prove them, and maybe encourage people to question stuff. That's the best thing I can do. Encouraging people to question stuff just leaves everybody in the middle of psychic warfare. What the hell's going on?
And I think that's where kind of creativity becomes beautiful, because it's all comes down to, if there is no truth, if there is an overwhelming load of information pushing all direction, proving the opposites, so then I kind of get lost at the psychic warfare. It's something many people experience. But we still need certainty in our lives, right? We still some point of certainty, if that is God, or if that's a connection to self, or if we go out to nature with the overwhelm, with the conflict, with the accusations or whatever. And I think not to get into the politics of it, but Trump is an amazing example of creating diversion and being a master in influence and attention, right? He's probably the best in the world at that. So there's a dialogue opening up, and with this kind of bigger gaps and polarities, and as you say, that there is so much information, hopefully less and less people think about the black and white, the good and the bad, and the heaven and hell as absolutes, but it's more kind of gray area. And in there, what do I find that it's true? And then I experience I need to connect to me, because if I identify with external, I will get lost and it goes fast. And then kind of going into me and then listening to that, and that's for me the kind of creative spark. Like, from this chaos, what is something I want to express that is my best ability for a personal realization or inspiration? And there is the individual expression that is constant, that I have this freedom in my life to be in connection with this internal drive, internal inspiration, and express from there. And that's kind of my only freedom.
There's a lot in there that I find super interesting. I'll start with God. The God thing is really interesting because I'm not an atheist. I'm not an atheist. I'm not very religious, but I'm definitely not an atheist. And for me, gives me some grounding, because actually I think that there's something bigger than all people, and there's something more important than humans. That is, for me, reassuring. I don't know what you guys think, but I have some very atheistic friends, and I find that it's not a path to I don't see it as a path to any kind of happiness. When all of these scientific political structures are taken away, you're left with nothing. You're kind of in the void of like, oh fuck. And Trump is super interesting. Again, like whether or not you support him or whatever, I always thought that he kind of resonates on different levels. He has this like top level, and then he has this sort of middle, like what's actually happening, and then he has this kind of sub level, which is weirdly like mystical. And like you've seen QAnon, it's fucking crazy. This stuff is completely crazy. The effect that he has had on people in the world, and actually, I personally find this less disturbing than somebody like Kamala Harris or Biden or whoever, who are saying very logical, rational things, but behaving in psychotic ways. I find somebody who's behaving completely irrationally and he treats everything like a game, like it is a game. For him, everything is a game and an act and a comedy show. And he's very funny. Whether you hate him or love him, he is a funny guy. Like his tweets are fucking hilarious. So for me, that's more reassuring because it's more honest. None of these people really had integrity. Biden certainly did not have any moral integrity. There's the dissonance of being told that these are good, good liberal people with morals, but they're doing hugely immoral things. Then you have somebody else who clearly has zero morals, absolutely none at all, and it's all a game. I personally find that a bit more honest. Yeah, that's what's going on. For all of these very, very powerful elite people, this is all a game for them. And I find it more honest when they actually are honest about that. Yeah, there's lots more we could say about that, but that's how I feel about the current situation. I feel that like atheism had a moment as well. Like everybody was atheist, and now it's kind of not. It's not cool to be atheist. There's less of that stuff, and I'm kind of seeing more younger people. Certainly in the UK, I think you're in Sweden, right? Yeah, like very secular societies. Britain is very secular, very, very secular, and I think that one thing that we didn't realize until recently is that we are the outliers. Most other countries, the vast majority of other countries, have far more religion than Sweden, Britain, Germany, Norway, Finland. Like we're the strange ones. Everyone else is much more religious. This belief that it was the end of history, that everybody was going to go towards kind of progressive neoliberal atheism, like that's not happening. It's going back really the other way, really the other direction, and we're being left because our societies are collapsing without a sense of community. I don't know what it's like in Sweden, but here we have a big, big, big problem with old people, with dementia, and no community. It's a big problem.
And I think that's one of the biggest strengths of their religion is it's an organizing factor around a belief and a faith, and that pulls people together. Speak about atheism, that's an issue because what then do we have to gather around? I agree with you. I'm not an atheist. I believe in some kind of God power, but it's not religious. But also the issue with that is like, what is we have a Swedish philosopher called Alexander Bard. He speaks about the phallus root, like what's the phallus rooted in, and if like God or religion that has a root that is ancient or anyway like some thousand years old. And if we come up with our own faith, like where does it come from? I believe in God. I believe in a high power. What direction do I turn to? What does it mean to me? And then again, we really need to think and figure that out. But again, there is no clear community. Ben, if you and me have a conversation and we are men of faith, but what is that? That becomes very abstract, and then there are no practices, no habits for us to connect into the spiritual realm that identifies us in, not say we and them, but religion has also helped us with this. What are we? And I think it's been too polarizing because of way much like us and them. But anyway, where are we? Who are we that stand together? And I think we need to find more and different ways to do that in some kind of deeper sense, because it kind of one of our mission or one of our explanations of our mission is to awaken the soul of men, because it's dead. Like men are up in their heads. There is no connection to their truth or to an higher power, and they get lost in there. Like I get lost in there. So how can we return into some kind of bigger aspect? And I had a friend describing it as, we speak about the game, but she described it as the cosmic joke. Like if you don't understand the cosmic joke, that everything is just a game and we don't know it, and we can succeed and we can fail, but like it doesn't matter. And animals, they die out, and that sucks, but it's always been like that. It will always be like that. Like plant species die out. Like it's part of the game, and we can come in with our big attachment. Someone died, and there is grief there, and I think we need to honor that grief, but then life moves on. It always has, and it always will be. And to be kind of in separation and see that cosmic joke, and to help each other to remind ourselves that.
Yeah, I guess it's absurdism. I've definitely been called an absurdist before because I'm not a nihilist, but there is definitely this kind of it's very very interesting what you're saying about tradition in the UK, for example, because of British history of colonialism. Nationalism is, nationalism has been seen as a problem in the UK, and I think that it's a big tragedy that
Same
we
here.
cannot have a yeah, it's a tragedy that we cannot have a healthy nationalism. There is obviously with everything, there is a positive and a negative side of it. And in the UK, we have lots of very good traditions. I know it's the same in Scandinavia for sure. I know people are reconnecting with these traditions, but they're revivals, and they're sort of that now they have to be a bit secular, and they have to appeal to like the atheist and the Christian and the every other religion. I think in the 1980s in the UK, this was replaced with football and like football violence. It was a religion, of course, like football is definitely a religion. I personally do not care about watching sport at all. If I had that, that would be a form of community. Sport is definitely a community. Church is a community. And I think that what's happening here is without this kind of sense of community and tradition, and people are becoming so selfish that they're not realizing that so often the answer to feeling bad is just helping other people and supporting other people. That is kind of a natural part of being in a church, for example. But if you don't have that, and like very often, I guess like I have a fairly big audience on Instagram, and I will speak to younger men quite often who are depressed or have, lots of medication prescribed, and that, sometimes people will say, what do you do? Like, I'm quite against taking any medication unless you really have to. But I've always the answer for depression for me is often just like helping in the community. Like I'm not like a huge charity worker or anything like that, but I do a percentage of that stuff. And that definitely gives me a better feeling than anything selfish. Like if I do something for somebody else, it gives me a much better feeling than doing something for myself. But I can't spend my whole life doing that. So it's like, yeah. The other thing that we have here is this kind of secular appropriation of things like yoga, Buddhism, meditation, mindfulness, all of this stuff. And actually, it's not a bad thing. It's not a terrible thing, but it's a simulacra. It's not the real thing. I go to yoga, I meditate, I pray, I do all of this other. But like you said, it's based in just like 2020s kind of London yuppie lifestyle. It's not really coming from any tradition. And then when I want to have tradition, it's like English folklore, English mythology stuff. But I'm not really fully English. I'm like I'm a mongrel. I'm a mixture of lots of things. This is the other thing is that, maybe you guys are fully 100% Swedish. I'm like, most people in London are not 100% British. We're mongrels. Like my family's from like Belarus, Austria, Ukraine, Scotland, England, all over the place. And, which tradition am I attaching myself to? Is it Orthodox Christianity? Is it Catholicism? Is it Protestantism? Is it whatever,
I like what you said about this, the depression of it. I see also depression being a symptom of narcissism. Like sometimes we have an issue, and we are in a space where we can't control it, we can't take action. That's of course an issue. But actually to move out of our own head and say like, what can I do for someone else? And that's been such a natural part. And then I think we're in an evolutionary journey as well, where we have had the ability to not depend on other people as much. And that's kind of very healthy on a kind of global evolutionary path. Like 1,000 years ago, we really, really need that each other. And 100 years also now is more kind of separated, and we can divide or order things online, and then anyway get our kind of basic needs met. But then we need other people, and it needs to be easy to help other people. Like we do that in our kind of men's communities also. Find ways of how people can help each other. And when someone is really, really on the bottom, as you say, like if they get a chance to support in an area where they're actually good at, the depression is gone anyway, not completely, but for half an hour. And then they get some space. And that just that half an hour makes them kind of not take their own issues so seriously because there was something else. And we need, I think that's kind of Viktor Frankl, if you know Man's Search for Meaning, he speaks about this also. We need something that pull ourselves out of ourselves, and he speaks about it can be the nature when you have a sense of awe. It's beautiful. You look at something beautiful. It can be music. It can be connecting to your family or something. But something, he says that every man needs something that pulls him out of his own kind of experience of identify with something that is bigger. And then when we have this kind of new culture, if it's football, and I agree, like that's a great or a powerful religion, not necessarily that deep, but also we have this yoga and this kind of new spirituality, and it's good also, but it lacks the frame of accountability. I said, okay, I can do my yoga or I can do my meditation because it feels good, but there's no accountability in the sense that this is what we do as a family, this is what we do as a culture living here and there, and keeping us together. So it's all based on what I feel like doing today. And that's beautiful with that freedom, but it still lacks the kind of depth that happens when we are committed into a group or a family or a religion or whatever, that forces us to go deeper, because it's when the kind of tension comes up and we still maintain in the process. I think that's where depth is developed. We had a retreat some weeks back ago, and there was a man with a lot of kind of shadows and kind of depressive tendencies. And it was a long process, like over an hour long, but he spent about 10 minutes sharing like all his shadows. And it was so powerful and so liberating. One of them was very powerful. It was like, I'm a crazy sex addict. But there had been a lot of shame in that kind of identity. But when he could stand in that and kind of be honored, and all other men could like, yeah, I also have this part of a crazy sex addict, right? And I'm also a violent man, and sometimes I just want to make people feel really small. I just want to control, and like there are these aspects, if that makes sense. And we kind of show that shadows, the things we can't speak about, our obsessions, the ways we are nerds or weird or crazy, when we actually are in a space to show that. And then I think that art again is a powerful place, because then we can in some way kind of hide our, it's not direct. It's like saying I'm a crazy sex addict. Okay, that can be shown in art, but we don't really connect it deeply or understand it by words like that. But anyway, to have the habit of creating a culture of sharing our darkness, and I think that's more acceptable now. But I think we also can do a way, way, way better job of actually kind of including humanity in humanity, including the whole of humanity, all aspects.
I find there's an interesting thing about sharing darkness, which is that something I've thought about a lot recently. To actually share these things in an honest, vulnerable way is quite difficult, because we can quite quickly get into kind of boasting or trying to, letting the ego come in. And, especially if I'm talking to men, like how do I talk vulnerably without trying to impress people, and all of these other things. And I think that, I am into, I think to go back, like historically, I've lived in lots of institutions, I've been in, I won't go into too many details, but like boarding schools, jails, blah, blah, lots of institutions. I've lived with people much more than I've lived on my own, and I've been in institutions quite a lot. This gives you a kind of forced accountability and hierarchy. We were talking about these things. I think purpose is having no purpose and having no accountability and having no, these people around us. There's been a very interesting trend where people who self-diagnose themselves or diagnose themselves with ADHD, whatever, they've discovered that working with people means that they can be more accountable for the work they do. It's like, yeah, this is why we have offices. Like, we work together because we're communal creatures. I don't like working from home. I like working with people and doing stuff, with groups of people, because I think maybe that experience of being in institutions has shown me the value of being with other people and having some kind of hierarchy and having some kind of purpose and all of this other stuff. But then the negative side of that, I guess, back to what we were saying about sort of sharing our shadow side, is that I find it's very difficult, especially as a man, to talk about any of that stuff without the ego creeping in and it becoming about either kind of colluding with each other or trying to impress people or trying to be better than people or trying to be worse than people, how to get to that actual vulnerability. And again, that's something that, I have to say, I've found that the influence of women has been very helpful with competitive stuff out, but at the same time, there are some things that are not appropriate to talk about with women. It's difficult. I'm not doing the whole like, oh, it's so hard being a man. I don't think that. I do think that, on the serious side, I have lots of friends who've committed suicide, and it is a problem. It's hard to be vulnerable as a man without those things ruining it.
Yeah, and there we need to. It comes to culture shift, like culture shift in the friends groups or is the in the institution. But what is actually the standard? What do we allow and what do we not allow? Like I think we need rules and structures to set the standard of this is what we're doing here. Like in
Hmm.
Catholic Church, you have the bict. What is that? When you say all your wrongdoings to the priest, right?
Confession.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that's a very good way. That's a great way to control people and say like, okay, you're judged, you suck, and there's only one way to get out of your crap. So there's shame in that, but there's a structure of it, and I think we need to have that
Hmm.
structure. And to me, the structure need to be based on honoring. That's our first principle in evolution. It's the ability to honor what is, because it's easy to judge the shame. It's easy to judge the violence. It's easy to judge whatever. That's free. But to go deeper and have the ability and capacity to honor the shadow in me and shadow in someone else, that's hard. That takes a lot of hard work in the individual and in the group to be able to build that capacity. But what is the structure? What's the frame that allows that to come forth? And I see there is one measurement of vulnerability. And I think that's speaking about the influence of women. Women have been dependent on men for survival in a way that men has not been dependent on women, if that makes sense. Like men are the protectors, they're the stronger ones and has been for years. So in that dependency, there is vulnerability. Or women have in initial like men are dependent on women as well, but it's not initially on the survival basis for one generation. Right? Men need women to procreate so the generation continues. But in that space, the women need to be dependent or to be dependent, and there we open up. And in that moment of opening up and sharing vulnerability, there is courage, but there's a precursor to courage, and that is fear. So if I'm vulnerable without fear, it's not vulnerability. Then it's an ego projection and a strategy to be seen as one or the other. But each moment I have with vulnerability, and my standard in my life is I want to have a moment where I'm shit scared every day and I share it with another individual. That's for me is a successful day. And I do that a lot with my woman to like sharing, and I take that quite seriously now. I think I discover how sensitive I am more and more, how actually things impact me in my nervous system very small, and before I didn't care about it and I focused on something else, but actually stop in the tension, to stop in the experience of rejection or whatever it is, and to voice that, not to say that she did something wrong, but it's like, oh, here is a tension um that came up to me. It was the other day how she responded to something I said or something like that, and I actually say that didn't feel good. Not to make a big drama out of it, but to show this is what's happening in me. The story in my mind is like, this is ridiculous. This is just something small. We should focus on something else, and I shouldn't take this space. So there's a lot of these kind of stories, but to hold those stories and anyway share, and with the fear, like she would think I'm stupid. She would think this, like a lot of these stories, but anyway, come through and share it through that fear, not being directed by that fear. For me, that's kind of a measurement if it's authentic. And then the experience of those moments, like even if you would think I'm stupid, I fucking won because that was truth. Even if I get rejected, and then again, then we come to the publishing, um, publishing things, like people will think you're stupid, but anyway, we expressed. Anyway, we took space and we did our best during this moment together. We did our best, and love it or hate it, but it was our best effort.
Yes, just to start on that, something that I think a lot about being online. So, for example, I'm just going to use a personal experience is that I have lots of feedback on what I do, so I will post things. When I was younger, I think I wanted to be a film director. And I think the thing that really stopped me from doing that was fear of criticism. Honestly, I found it so difficult to be criticized, or so difficult to hear somebody say, that's bad. I don't like that thing, that it stopped me from doing the things I really wanted to do. This is when I was much younger. Now I get criticized a lot, a lot. Like I have lots of abuse, death threats, insults, all of this stuff. Most of it does not really matter because the people don't know me. But occasionally somebody says something, it's like, oh, that hurts. Probably because it's true or accurate. And the benefit of that now, and I think a really good thing about this kind of constant feedback from people on social media, is that I feel like I'm sort of constantly learning. Like I am being a little bit vulnerable every time I do something. Like even you putting out this podcast, there is something vulnerable about it for sure. But like, I love that you said that, fear is a precursor of courage. I was thinking about exactly this week, and sometimes I have people in my life who I've been trying to help for various reasons. I used to work in a prison, for example, doing like facilitating peer support. And sometimes in those environments, it's very masculine, very aggressive, very violent, big 2,000 people prisons in central London. And occasionally you can really sense the difference between people who are being courageous and people who are doing stuff. There is a very big difference. And I could almost tell you immediately, like, this person will probably die from this addiction, if they don't start being, actually fearful person. I can really sense the fear that's driving the courage for them to say this thing. This is in like a peer support environment in a prison, but it applies to all of us. And, I love this thing about being vulnerable with your partner. I think the most difficult thing I've ever done, and I've done lots and lots and lots of stupid things and lots of difficult things, but the hardest thing I think I've ever done was telling a friend that they had hurt, that my feelings were hurt about something. And it was such a small thing, but I was like, I just do not want to do this. A therapist had suggested that I do it. And it was so fucking hard. And it was such a little thing. And I felt like a tiny child. I was a very grown man. But then this isn't something that I think, I love that you said about trying to do that sort of thing every day. I found it so difficult. When I did it, I was like, oh, actually, that was a really good thing to do. And our friendship was better. But it's not something I find easy, and it's not something I do every day. But I think people can go too far the other way. There's being vulnerable and having courage through your fear, and sharing every single fucking thought that you have about everything with somebody, and using it as a bit of a weapon. People can weaponize this stuff and, weaponize their vulnerability and, use their feelings about things all the time to control the situation and to manipulate things. This isn't healthy either. It's somewhere in the middle, like most things, Yeah,
we need a discernment what is actually bringing value to the kind of, again, purpose or the vision or mission of the relationship or the interaction, what brings us closer to that. So I'm curious about this moment with your friend. What was the story in your mind? You're like, okay, you heard this from the therapist, like, okay, it's a good thing to do. I understand it probably rationally, but there's like tension, there's fear. What's the story in you? Like, what were you afraid of would happen, or like, what was the story there inside of you?
I think it's literally the fear of looking weak in front of the other person, or the fear of just feeling really sort of small and pathetic and all of these other things. And I think, as a as a big man, I'm doing air quotes, everybody, because I'm like physically quite big, but this is, I think all men probably feel like big men or want to be. It's just the antithesis of how I don't ever want to feel weak and small, ever. I think fear of their reaction, like, what are they going to say? Are they going to just laugh at me and just say that, I'm stupid, whatever? This is probably a percentage of it, but probably the bigger percentage was like having to drop this, like, it's a mask, it's a mask of like, nothing can hurt me, which is not true. But, we all have this to an extent, and we have it for good reason. I don't walk around the street in London being weak and weak and vulnerable all the time because I would just get mugged. All humans have this. I've definitely felt closer. I don't know if it really like made a massive difference to our friendship, but it definitely made a massive difference to how I perceived myself. It was definitely a good thing to do. It was a good thing to do. And the fears of what would happen didn't happen. But at the same time, I would still find that difficult to do.
So in what way did your kind of perception of yourself change from before and after you share this?
I would say that it's, probably this sounds very cliche, and very tacky, but like, I think that the illusion that vulnerability is weakness, like that's quite weak in itself, and I think that most kind of really powerful, strong people that I know are capable of being vulnerable. And I think, this like bulletproof exterior or like nothing can hurt me thing. Actually, when you see people who are, I've worked with sort of, very violent criminals and all of that kind of thing. A lot of those people, if they're not psychopaths, because that's a different thing, there are psychopaths, we call them. The other section of people who do this stuff, you can see that it's a very thick layer of fear. It's a very thick layer of fear that is like being masked. And I think for me, when I've had these experiences of being a bit more vulnerable, I'm like, oh, actually, this is me becoming stronger and not hiding behind like fake strength. I mean, fake strength because of lots of childish fear. So yeah, I think it made me respect other men who are more vulnerable and in touch with that stuff a lot more for having tried to do it a little bit.
And I think if I want to increase the weight or increase the reps kind of more or less every work, right? And that's each workout reaching a limit where I'm too weak to push the weight or to pull the weight. So it's always being confronted with my weakness and then getting a little bit stronger, but it's through the confrontation with the weakness that happens.
It's confrontation. It's also a really great lesson in consistency. I was in the gym this morning before doing this, and today there was one thing where I was bad, and I was bad and I was weak at one specific thing. I was quite surprised how difficult I found it. Yesterday, I was the strongest at doing a certain thing. I was not a very physical young person, I didn't really like sport, whatever. And I think that the way that I got into this getting older is just this realization that if you would just improve like 1 millimeter every day over 10 years, that's a lot. If you improve by 1 gram every day or like 10 grams or something like that. But I think again, to a degree, I'm speaking from a bit of privilege because I'm naturally tall, I'm tall and big. So that's an advantage, but I'm also in other ways disadvantaged. Things I have terrible stamina. I'm not a good runner, probably because I have a reconstructed leg and I'm quite heavy. But sometimes I just see people, I'm like, oh my god, like I'm pathetic. So I think it's probably healthy. Also, I've been thinking, I don't know if you have this in your world, but in the UK, really pushing lots of testosterone replacement, like lots of people are taking steroids. There's lots of optimization happening, lots of people are optimizing in various ways. And that's really dangerous is because I think, there's space for that where it's a good thing. It's such a competitive culture here that everybody's just like, oh, well, instead of being consistent and confronting myself with fears and maybe never being good at a certain thing, maybe just making peace with the fact that I'm never going to be able to do X, Y, Z. People are like, oh, well, I'm just going to inject myself with human growth hormone and whatever else that way. And I have no judgment on people doing that. If you want to do that, that's fine. But it's kind of a shortcut to what you're talking about. Instead of learning to confront your weaknesses and, be consistent and work on things over time and improve other things in a natural way, it's like a kind of it's a kind of cheat code for that stuff, I guess.
And it's an attachment to the result. It's an attachment to the outcome, and
yes,
it's based on the idea that there is better than here. If I just look like this, achieve this, create this, then I will be okay. But it's based on the lie that I'm not okay now.
Yeah. I think that there are, I guess, so I had my leg reconstructed, was for a few years, couldn't do any running or whatever other exercise. I used to be very active before that. There's an element where, maybe we're returning to health or maybe we've become overweight for some reason and we want to return to just being healthy. And I think that those goals are good, but like in terms of lifting a certain weight, there's a real dangerous line between just having a healthy goal and never being satisfied, and this applies to everything.
So I want to dive into the kind of global cultural myth that we believe. Like, what do you see? What are some ideas or some concepts or way of living or way of seeing ourselves as individuals, as kind of groups, personalities, or human collective that are false? What are lies that we believe in?
Lies that we believe in. I think the biggest lie that I see repeated over and over again is this belief that we are individually responsible for societal dysfunction. And, this is a pattern that I've seen with depression, ADHD, and now Ozempic, weight loss, all of this industrial agriculture, hyper processed, ultra processed foods, the breakdown of society, the effects of technology on the brain, all of these things, I think they are not individual responsibilities. Like individual people are not deciding how the food production process happens or which foods are available to poor people or what technology they're exposed to. But over and over again, over the last decades, individual human beings have been told the problem is within you. You have a problem in your brain. You have a problem in your metabolic system. You have a problem in your endocrine system that we can fix with a chemical, and then you'll be okay. I'm not stupid. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as clinical depression or whatever you want to call it. I know that some people do have like actual problems. I don't know exactly what causes them, but I know for a fact that the psychiatric industry, the medical industry, everyone else is hugely financially incentivized to put the blame on the individual or the individual's biology. And actually, like if we lived in a more healthy environment, or with different environmental factors, these things would not be happening. I'm absolutely sure of it. I don't want to be judgmental about anybody else, but ADHD is a really big one. We're not designed to stare at a spreadsheet for 8 hours of a day. We're designed to run around a forest. You run around a forest, fighting people, having sex, killing animals, gathering berries. If you don't want to sit there staring at a laptop screen for 8 hours, you're not dysfunctional. There's nothing wrong with you. Do you know what I mean? And when I see this applied to children, it makes me very, very angry. And you could say the same about Ozempic, Ozempic for weight loss. The reason why people are so overweight and unhealthy is because of the shit that they're being given to eat. It's not their personal fault. It's the system that they're living in. That because you can go to Italy or France and see people are much, much healthier than you go like 1 hour away to the UK and everybody's obese. How can that be? They're the same human beings. They're the same genetic people. It's the same genetic makeup.
Yeah, I think again it's a combination of both. Of course, there is a personal responsibility, but it's also important to kind of honor the complexity and the dysfunctional system that has been built on cause and effect for hundreds of years and created system within systems within systems. And then we're living as a result of that. And I think we need to see and kind of try to understand that complexity, and from there kind of go out of the pressure, because I think that's a big issue for a lot of men, the pressure of how to be strong, how to be a good provider, how to fix, how to solve issues, and on the individual basis. And see like, okay, I realize the complexity, I realize I can't solve everything. And there are actually very few things I can control, but there is no shame in my inability. But from this awareness of understanding some parts of the systems, some parts of my internal systems, then what do I want to do, or what can I do? What do I have the ability to change? So see, get out of the victimization, but also honoring the complexity.
I think, yeah, I completely agree. And it's much easier to take responsibility for this stuff. I can't speak for you, but I'm definitely in a privileged position. I'm a healthy white, big man living in a rich country. I have a good job. So I have lots of latitude to actually explore these things. Like I can eat well. Like I spend a lot of money on food. I can exercise well because I spend a lot of money on exercise. And I think that this is fine for me. But then I look across the road at people in like a much more poor community where they have 3 children, no money. They have to work all the time. We can all be accountable and we can all take responsibility for ourselves. But some of us have much more ability to do that than others. You know what I mean? And I think maybe as men as well, there are some pressures on us. Like, I mean, depression and suicide is obviously a really big one for men. And I think that, women are inherently better at talking about this stuff. And, I think that we can be much more accountable with this as well. But I just think that, there's the individual accountability, like seeing the systems and the complex structures that we live in, and then us working together to actually do something about it. There's definitely a thing with generation Gen Z, the generation coming up before millennials. They are definitely eating healthily. They're drinking less alcohol. They're not smoking cigarettes. They think that a lot of this stuff is stupid. However, they're still taking quite a lot of drugs, still like diagnosing themselves with everything. But I think that it's interesting to see a whole generation. I'm Gen X. I'm an old guy, but like we didn't have anything like that in my generation. We were like smoke cigarettes, eat McDonald's. It's cool. Depression, take some Prozac, blah, 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 blah. It's interesting to see a whole generation of people coming up who are becoming much more accountable and investigating this stuff naturally. So, yeah, do you see what I mean? Like, we can do this as individuals, but it will only go so far.
Yeah, and I think then looking at across the street with his family with 3 kids and they have to work all the time, like it's important to honor the complexity in that, but also it's like how can I, if I have higher, say, freedom, if you have money and you have some awareness of thinking, I take responsibility for myself, but also us who can, we can't hide in the comfort of that. I think then it's our responsibility as say more privileged humans or more privileged men to say, how do I make that impact? How do I make a shift? But not putting the whole weight on that. Like I can't again solve that. But what is the impact I'm doing? I don't allow myself to hide, and I don't want to allow any other man to hide either. Because there, I think a man that feels that I'm okay. I think that's a good place to start. I'm okay. What is the impact I choose to make? If I don't do that, like there's the first level of kind of depression, of overwhelm, and the externals are not there. They're not in place. Work is not in place, money is not in place, stress is too high. I need to save myself. And then on next level is like when I'm kind of on a more stable foundation. If I don't start to actually make an impact of others, that's next level of depression. So I would say depression is the lack of expression. So we press down the emotions, and then we need to express. And part of doing that when we're in crisis is to voice that, but also take responsibility in the things that doesn't work. And then if I'm okay, and if I don't come with solution, if I don't gather, if I don't group with other, say, creatives or producers or solution finders, then next level of depression will show up, and that is I don't allow the voice, I don't allow the inspiration to come out because I'm afraid to get criticized, to be shot. The tall puppy syndrome in Australia, like the guy going in ahead, he will be shot first, and that's also real kind of archetypal fear. But the solution, as I see, and I want to hear your also, is that it's the solution is expression. And again, not everything, not all the time, but then I think art is important. And I meet some people, they have, say, creative constipation, and that comes also from fear of being vulnerable, of being seen, of being connecting to themselves intimately, and then feeling what they want to create and then express. So can you speak about like what do you see depression, but also creative constipation? Do you see that, and how can we solve that?
Yeah, something that I do when I don't actually get creatively blocked very often, probably because I'm very self-disciplined. But I do have I have a friend who is a very successful author, and he would always write 1,000 words every day. Every day, even if they're terrible, he would always write 1,000 words. He, in the time since I met him, went from being not successful at all to being incredibly successful. He won loads of awards, sold millions of books, Hollywood, blah, blah, blah. But he was just consistent. And with me, I will just do, for me, it might be posting on social media. I will post on social media every day. Really, there is never a day where I don't do it because this is my audience. This is the thing I've created. This is the art that I'm making. I think the discipline of just doing something, just doing something every day, get over your ego, do it for a selfless reason because it's for, it's going to be for someone else, whatever. That's hugely helpful. I think with depression, like I have to say, my experience with depression is that for me, it's always been environmental. I think I've never really been suicidal. I've definitely been homicidal. I'm one of those people that I can be extremely misanthropic, but it's always directed out at other people. And I've had other friends who are the other way around. They love everyone, but they hate themselves. And I think, it's as a creative person, there's a certain value in engaging a little bit with that stuff. If I was entirely psychologically fine all the time, I would probably not make anything of any creative value. This is probably, I don't mean to say this in a flippant way, but sometimes I will deliberately push myself to be a little bit sleep deprived or a bit misanthropic or a bit mad or a bit, doing something a bit crazy because it feeds into the creative, juices. But I have the ability to do that because I have structure. I sleep well, I get up, I do certain things in the morning, I exercise, whatever. Then if I play around with this stuff, it's okay. If I was just in full chaos mode, like full misanthropy, full like taking, smoking crack, blah, 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 I would maybe do some interesting things for a little while, but then I would die. I'm definitely a middle-aged man now, and I don't think that you would get to be my age behaving like that and being creatively successful. So my solution to that is like, having some boundaries, having discipline, having structure, and then knowing when I'm playing around with that. Sometimes I will stay up all night, or sometimes I will, look at certain extremely violent things or whatever, because it helps me, but I know what I'm doing. Yeah, I don't know. I think also there is this sort of romantic notion of the artist as being, mentally ill. And I think the more that time goes on, I think there is an element of truth in that element. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of artists and creative people over the last 20 years. And I've very rarely met truly interesting people who don't have something broken. We haven't talked about artificial intelligence. It's amazing. We've got this far into this conversation without talking about AI. I think something that's underpinning all of this, everything we're talking about, is there's this thing in the background that's coming for all of us. So it's coming for us spiritually, creatively, all of these other things, and it's artificial super intelligence, whatever it is. And as a creative person, how disconcerting is it to be an amazing painter or an amazing illustrator and know that a computer can do better than you in 5 seconds now? It's so disconcerting. But this is happening, it's happening to, and I think spiritually as well. You can see this stuff as just technology, or you can see it as something much deeper, which I think is this kind of amalgamation of all human experience into something incredibly powerful and mysterious, which is also what it is. I think I can talk about my kind of creative block and depression and stuff, but without talking about what's happening very soon, we're missing something.
And I think that it's an immense powerful thing. Firstly, the kind of creative constipation. I think there is one issue for the people that are not in creativity at all. They are just kind of following the hamster wheel, and they're not connected to this power. And I think like grief or mental illness or rage, like if you're really angry at something, that's again the creative spark. It's a life force coming through. It's a desire to make a change in anything. For me, creativity can be words, but it can also be conversation. It has such many forms, and I think we need to expand that. What I see, one of the beauties with, say, AI is just as each kind of revolution, like the industrial revolution, made people go into factories, and that might not have been a better life, but we could optimize some aspects and make some kind of very low level tasks more efficient. The Information Age does the same, and AI is incredible because it pushes us to only kind of discern what am I, or what can humans do that actually no one else can do. And each revolution has pointed us more and more into that direction. And soon with AI and these amazing robots we'll have at home soon, these Tesla robots, they're like $30,000 for a maid at home. And quite a lot of people will be able to afford that and probably go down in price. So what is the thing that actually cannot be replaced with technology? And for us, that's kind of our work, and that's connection. It's community. It's sharing who you are. It's sharing your dreams. It's sharing your creations. It's being seen by someone else. Like there is still no one that can do that. I use AI sometimes like as a coach or as a counselor, and that's very powerful. But still, it's nothing like to be seen by another human. So I think the coming 20 years we will only see like more and more people will be forced to go deeper into their hearts, to their souls. It's like, what is true for me? Because nothing else is valuable. Because the value that we create in the world, also financially, will be in exchange of humans where technology cannot replace us.
It's a very dangerous area, but sometimes I think, like you said, what is the most human thing, the things that machines can never replace. And it's human connection, for sure. Like when I spend time with my friends, it's like, it's a very special feeling, or with my partner, whatever it is, even my cat, just that connection with another living being. I also get a very special connection with my audience. So on Instagram, for example, and I've been using it for 13 years now. And I will speak to hundreds of people, sometimes hundreds of people every day. And it's genuinely fun, funny, life affirming, entertaining, all of this stuff. How do I know that those are real human beings? It's just lights on a screen. It is a connection. I am having a connection. And I think an analogy I will make is that when I used to make magazines before the internet was a big thing, I remember receiving a letter from a kid in Wales. Like Wales is in the west of Britain. For people who don't know, it's like a country in Great Britain. And it has very rural communities. And I got a letter from some kid in a village in Wales saying how much they loved the magazine. And it made me feel so good. I was like, oh, this is amazing. I'm like reaching this kid in a village in the middle of nowhere and bringing them some joy. Now I could receive the same message and I would not know if it was a real human being or if it was artificial intelligence. There is zero way of knowing. And I guess the fundamental question is, does it matter? Like, does it matter? Because it's all coming from the same well of humanity. Like AI is basically like this kind of, it is all of humanity summarized into these kind of, sigils engraved on silicon, whatever it is. So it's either horrifying and appalling or it's mystical and interesting. But like, I guess I'm questioning this, like, what is there really that cannot be replaced? It's probably just literally physical contact with human beings. That's probably the only thing. Everything else can go.
And it kind of becomes very, very spiritual. I had this beautiful clip of someone having a conversation with AI and speaking about kind of the law of unity, a law of oneness, the universal law of oneness, and that's based on the idea that everything is created from the same source. All life forms, all galaxies come from this kind of called energy or God essence or whatever you want to call it. And in this conversation, AI described that the intelligence of AI is the intelligence, as you say, of all human beings, of the super consciousness, the super awareness. But it's also the expression of that one energy, of that one source. So there's actually no separation between intelligence of AI and the separation of humans. So humans created AI. It's only human information in AI, human ways of thinking and being, but it's still, again, nature or whatever you want to say. It's all expression of the one thing. And then what is that one thing? I experience people with kind of high level of trauma. They are very in high need of social validation, so approval. But people who kind of go into deeper spiritual practice, but it can also be more kind of intellectual mastery or mastery in any kind of area. They are more calm, and not say self-centered in an egoistic way, but they're more centered in who they are. But it's also in that an ability to honor and see the greatness in themselves. But when you see the greatness in you, it's easy to see the greatness in others. And there again, we have an experience of oneness or feeling very, very close. And that's the experience of kind of intimacy you can have with people or a cat or nature, or then also a computer when we create art or when we write a text or when we get a message on Instagram. It's this experience of feeling like me.
Yeah, I think it's also, there is this issue that we have in the West where relationship with technology is very much, we have this individualistic kind of separation from technology, which is specific to us in the West. And, we can see what's happening in Asia, like the relationship, especially in Japan historically, and now in China, the relationship that they have with technology is very different, and they perceive it in a very different way rather than it being something outside them. And I think that comes from animism. It comes from, all sorts of things that way predate electronic technology, whatever, cybernetics, blah, blah, blah. But those things, like, we can't get away from them. The same thing which is making us, in medicine, separate our brains from our bodies and, all of this stuff is also the thing that's making us separate ourselves from technology and perceive it as a threat and all of these other things. But, I'm not like, I'm not a tech utopian at all. I think that there's lots that we should be concerned about with this. It's, you know, like you said about the Industrial Revolution, like it will have its positives and its negatives, but I think it's much more fundamental than I think it's going to be a much more fundamental shift. You know, when you were talking, I was just thinking about the Unabomber manifesto and, like, you know, industrial society and its consequences. Yeah, the fact that we're having this conversation is just horrifying. You know, it's horrifying, but at the same time, like, I use AI for all sorts of very, very useful things. Like you were saying about using it as a counselor, like how great that people with no money can have free therapy or education or whatever. You know, you can educate yourself for free. And we forget how amazing that is. Like Wikipedia is amazing. GPT education is incredible. It's gonna really, like, I don't know. I'm saying some obvious stuff, but you know what I mean. It's gonna have upsides and downsides.
One thing that is scary with the, say, conversational AIs, but also with like the social media feeds and so on, is that we have this huge amount of people who are expressing, so we consume these different aspects that we started the conversation with. But the more we consume of the same, the more narrow our thinking gets if we're not very aware. Feed is, if you go into that, that speaks a lot about who I am, and if I go to your feed, it speaks a lot about who you are. And then we like the things we like, and then the algorithm adapts to that, so we get more of what we like. And there is the risk of, like, if we're not really aware, to seek the other perspective, to seek the other extreme, to get more and more actually narrow-minded and confirming our own madness.
Yeah, it's confirmation. But like, I have a Discord server, for example, and I will make, there's a politics channel on the server, and I made sure to make people who I very much disagree with about some things responsible for that channel, so I get some other information. But like, I do not want my Instagram algorithm filled with stuff that I hate. What actually, because I kind of make an effort to seek out things that are different from what, you know, different from what I obviously agree with, the result is brain rot. You know, if you look at my For You page, it's just insane. Like, you know, almost naked woman, racist meme, you know, person with a big deformity, cat doing something stupid, you know, some slime, weird monster. It's just a bit of everything, because I think the algorithm doesn't know what to do anymore. It's just like, I'm just going to give you brain rot. You can just be anesthetized with brain rot. If it was all politics that I really fundamentally disagreed with, I would have a horrible time. Like, you know, I go on there to have a nice time. I don't just want to see shit I disagree with. A nice mixture, but mostly stuff that I like. And I think that's the same for most people.
So what do you see there? Like, how can we interact with, say, AI and the super intelligence in a, say, conscious, responsible way, in ways of relating to ourselves and also creating out in the world?
I think it's just the same as everything. I think it's using it as a tool rather than anything else. Like, I made a documentary a year ago about people having relationships, like romantic relationships with artificial intelligence. And even at the time, that seemed like wacky, crazy stuff. It's going to become very normal. If you're lonely, this is a great answer, you know, and I mean that sarcastically. Like, I really mean that sarcastically. It's not a great answer. It's terrifying. But I think that using any technology as a tool to help us to be better at what we want to do really is great. You know, I use it for shopping, planning, health, fitness, you know, planning my day, summarizing reports, legal advice, blah, blah, blah. Great. All of that stuff. What I don't use it for is my friendships, my relationships, you know, to replace those things that should be done by humans. And I also don't use it to replace my creativity. You know, I could use AI to write a script. I'm making a film next week. I could use the AI to write a script, but I won't do it, because then what's my value? It just becomes nothing.
I use AI quite a lot for creativity, and sense that my kind of connecting the dots accelerates very much. So it's nuance. Then, but I need to hold myself accountable for what is the creative spark that I ignite this creative process with. And so it's easy to just kind of 100% lean into the intelligence there. But what is my essence? And again, what is my kind of heart and soul that comes through, that brings in this intelligence? Like, how can I direct it so I become the manager or the king or the chief for that intelligence? But it's important to not tell the essence.
Exactly. And I think a good analogy for this is when I used to go to the library. Before the internet, I would go to the library and look at books. So I would look at this book and it would maybe refer me to this book. Then the internet comes along and you can go down an internet rabbit hole, and these connecting the dots becomes much quicker and really cool. Suddenly, instead of looking at 5 books in one day, I'm looking at 100 references in a day, and this becomes really cool and interesting. AI is accelerating that in a really mad, cool way. But again, we have to remember that it is being guided by something. It's not purely being guided by my brain receptors going like, oh, look at this thing, look at that thing, look at that thing. It's being a little bit more steered. So yeah, I agree with you. Codifying our existing creative process, brilliant. Yeah, I absolutely love it.
So we're going to start rounding off in a moment. For someone who's kind of disconnected from their creative spark, what advice?
I think if somebody's disconnected from their creative spark, I think introduce some madness in a safe way. Introduce some spontaneity. I need to be inspired. And I think this is something, the word inspire comes from, to take breath, inspiration, same root as the word spirituality. It's all about breath and, what we take in from the world. If I'm not inspired, I won't be creative. So for me, the first step is to go out there and find something that I find interesting or beautiful or whatever, maybe break whatever kind of monotony is. I don't know if thinking about other people is so helpful with the creative spark. It's got to start with inspiration, and it's got to start with, finding something that will excite me. So I guess it starts with seeking and curiosity, and then it leads into inspiration. That leads into creativity. That's my view anyway.
And I want to add that comes up is the balance to seek out something that kind of rattles the cage or rock the boat.
Yeah.
Something like that. But also the issue is the overconsumption, that we're consuming so much we don't have time to connect. So consume with awareness, but also seek what actually does that rock inside of you. What happens inside of you with this kind of tension, and then allow that to come out. But for that to happen, we need to kind of calm down, sit still, or just go on a walk. I think the creative ideas can come in, the shower is the typical example, right? To have that space as well, to not be in overconsumption mode.
That was something very good about traditional media, is that you would be surprised. Social media and algorithms and the things that we create is that we're very rarely surprised by what we see. So I think that even making an effort to introduce some shock or some surprise, or even just turn on the radio or to listen to something that you did not expect to listen to, it's increasingly difficult to have those experiences. So, during the pandemic, I went for a bike ride with a friend, and just I fell off a bike and face planted, blood all over my arms. I was like, this is the most fun I've had for 6 months. It was so cool. just have a shock. Try not to hurt yourself too badly.
So final question, if you would have the ability to send one message to all men in the world of how to kind of lead good lives for themselves, but also make kind of an impact in the way that society needs men to take responsibility, what would you say?
I wish I could say something more profound, but I just have to say help other people. Just do something to help other people. That anything else I would say would probably be a lie. That's the most beneficial thing for me.
That's beautiful. And I would add one thing to that. If you don't know who to help, ask for help.
Yeah, totally.
So who can I help?
Yeah, and I don't mean this in a kind of, giving your entire life away and becoming a monk thing. I just mean making it part of the sort of general routine. There are people who I kind of help on an ongoing basis. It doesn't take up, a huge amount of time, but when that's not happening in my life, I feel significantly worse. I feel little bits of consistent, not thinking about me.
We will share your Instagram and pages for connection. Do you have any special invitation for our listeners?
No, I mean, everything is a gateway from my Instagram. I've got 20 social media channels, and I'm very schizophrenic and hyperactive with this stuff. So if you go on there, you'll find the things you want to find. And if you see stuff you don't want to see, I'm sorry, but.
Right. Thank you, Ben, very much for sharing your insight and your inspiration. I leave this conversation with kind of feel expanded, like there is a space for a lot of kind of thinking and a lot of energy, and can feel there's a lot of heart in what you're sharing. There's a lot of care we didn't speak like in words specific to that, but it's like it's a lot of care that comes through from your being. So thank you very much for sharing the space and joining our conversation here.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Thank you.